Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name's Vicky Illich, and I'm doing the session on behalf of Derby Research School on rethinking mental health and inclusion. So if I can ask you to pop your cameras on, just because I will be popping you into some breakout rooms to do some of the tasks, so it'll be nice if the other people in the rooms can see you and have a chat with you in relation to this. So I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle stop tour into mental health and well-being, which is my area of specialism. But any questions or anything, either just pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand function, I think, on Zoom, and I'll obviously answer any questions that you've got as we go along. So just for those of you who have never or haven't been to a facilitation by Derby Research School before, so we've got Tammy, Amy and George. George is on the call with us tonight just in case we have any technical issues, and to point me in the right direction if I'm not quite doing the right thing. So I may have met some of you before, I'm not sure. So a little bit about me. So as I said, my name's Vicky Illich. I'm mental health and wellbeing lead for SALT, which is the Spencer Alliance for Leadership and Teaching. I also am SCIT coordinator, so that's a school-centred initial teacher training coordinator. And I've been doing that for about 13 years. So I've worked for SAT for quite a while. But my areas of specialism are anxiety, depression and CBT, mental health first aid and counselling and mental health. So it's a personal passion of mine, mental health and wellbeing. It's something that I believe is and should be as big as safeguarding in schools. I think it's really important. I think it's important at all levels, right through from the children up to, senior leadership and beyond. So I am going to give you, like I said, a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'll try not to do too much talking as I don't want to bore you to tears. But when I started looking into mental health and wellbeing and things like that, I was quite interested with the definition of what mental health and wellbeing is. And on the screen at the moment, I'm not going to read it out to you. I'll give you a couple of seconds just to read it. So that is the definition of it by the World Health Organization. I think one of the things that really struck me about mental health when I started learning a little more about it and looking a little bit more into it is that everybody suffers with mental health at some point, good mental health or ill mental health. It's when it causes a significant disturbance for a longer period, obviously when it becomes a bit more of a problem. I've had issues with my own mental health in the past. I've suffered from anxiety and depression. And that's where my passion really for mental health started, trying to understand a little bit more about it. I wanted to understand the reasoning behind it, why I felt the way I did. Is there anything I could do? So I started to unpick those kind of behaviours and look into it a bit more to see if I could get into the nitty gritty of, a bit of the psychology behind it and understand it, hoping that might help me to move forward and, stop things like that happening again. There are lots of different mental health issues, so I've just tried to summarise a few of them on the screen. So there are ones that you will have heard more of and are more commonly aware of, and then there are some that you might not know a lot about. So things like anxiety, GAD, which is general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, health anxiety. Social anxiety is one that I come across quite commonly, especially people in like public places, public transport and things like that. And then depression and mood disorders, trauma related, obsessive compulsive related, so OCD, hoarding disorder, body dysmorphia disorder, psychotic disorders, and then eating disorders. So there are a lot of mental health issues and conditions. I'm not trained to diagnose in anything like that, but do look at the warning signs and some of the signs that people might be struggling. And for quite a few of them, there are common signs and things to look out for as colleagues in the workplace, and, you know, for family and friends and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about why staff wellbeing matters in schools. So there's rising pressure in education in all areas. So education staff face continued pressure from increased workloads, challenges within the sector. You know, that I know budgets are tighter than ever for a lot of teams and things like that. And I know from working in a teacher training perspective that recruitment into teaching is, you know, more difficult than ever, which then has an impact on the amount of teachers being recruited and things like that. So I do think it's important to look at those bigger pictures. And there's the Teacher Wellbeing Index, which brings up a lot and helps a lot in terms of where things are at with that. So if you ever get a chance to have a look at the Teacher Wellbeing Index, that's really worth a look to see some of the highlighted areas. There are benefits to prioritising wellbeing. It helps staff feel valued, supported, motivated, enhances performance and emotional health at work. It also helps create that connection into the quality teaching. So emotionally healthy staff build better relationships, are able to manage classrooms more effectively, remain creative and resilient in the workplace, as well as lots of other things. And it has an impact on work stability. So good wellbeing raises psychological safety, commitment, reducing turnover and supporting school success. I think when you feel heard and listened to and understood, that does make you feel valued. It makes you feel like you matter and that, you know, somebody wants to listen and help and support you. But with mental health and wellbeing, it is, you know, a large task to do that in schools, especially with, you know, the things that are available at the time. So the recruitment and retention in reality, many teachers leave specific schools due to heavy workloads and lack of adequate support. It's not necessarily the profession itself. It's not teaching that they don't like. It's potentially, you know, how much is being asked of them and all of those things, and the things that it constantly changes in education too. School reputation. So when recruiting, candidates do consider school reputation. You know, they may speak to somebody who's been employed there before or previously, or somebody that they know. They look at leadership style and work-life balance when choosing any type of employment. You know, you do look at those kind of things. Support for early career teachers. So, you know, good quality induction, mentoring, leadership support are crucial for retaining early career teachers and ensuring their wellbeing, because I suppose at that point they are still finding their feet in the world of education and teaching. So it is important, you know, to nurture them and try and enhance, you know, their experience and practice. And then embedding wellbeing into practice. So integrating wellbeing into your recruitment, your daily practice, leadership encourages workforce stability and loyalty. Something that we've noticed at the Skit over the last few years is there's more and more trainees, when looking at coming on board now, asking specific questions about what support is available for mental health and wellbeing. So I do support learners on a one-to-one basis. I also do facilitation similar to what I'm doing now. I do inductions for all of the cohorts so that they have an awareness of what health and wellbeing is, to try and increase the understanding for everybody so that everybody is aware. A lot of things in schools is to do with the culture of what's being shown, the experiences that people are having. the interactions, the connections, the expectations. If somebody's come to work as a teacher from outside of the sector, their expectations are probably very different to what may have been elsewhere. I've worked for completely different organisations outside of the education sector, and mental health and wellbeing in those sectors looked very different. In education, it looks really different. Everybody in the main has multiple job titles, is doing multiple jobs at the same time. For teachers, you're also looking after the children's mental health and wellbeing in the classroom and trying to deal with that as well as trying to deal with your own. The demands of the job are difficult. So the role of leadership, I think it's really important for leadership to influence in the culture of the school. So, decision making, managing pressure, treating staff with respect and fairness, open communication, leading by example, all the things that we do for the children. It's helpful if that is the culture and the ethos of the school, and the people within it. Positive versus negative cultures. So positive cultures tend to foster like trust, safety. Negative cultures tend to cause anxiety, reduce morale and commitment. We had a training session for our staff members as part of SALT not so long ago, and that looked at understanding where you fit within an organisation and what your purpose of your role is and where your work fits into that. And I think, again, being clear, concise, with accurate information helps create a good workforce, and it helps people understand where they fit within a wider organisation. And then a little bit about sustainable culture. So improving wellbeing requires post examination. It requires consistency as well. So, not saying one thing and doing another, being there for the staff, and that open door policy. There's the saying, isn't there, that actions speak louder than words. And I do think when it comes to mental health and wellbeing, it does help. One way that we have tried to integrate mental health and wellbeing with our teams is something called a wellness action plan. So people call it a WAP. So a wellness action plan is something that a member of staff can go through with their line manager, and it talks about what they look like when they are well, and they're not suffering with any mental health issues. It also talks about the things to look out for when they're not on top form or when they're struggling. So it gives line managers and the employee some guidance and structure for when things maybe aren't going so well, about how some support, some scaffolding, some structure can be put into place, and that's already been sort of prior agreed before the difficulties come in. It's always worth something to look at. There are lots of different wellness action plans available for organisations like Mind. Mental Health England have got some. So it's definitely worth having a look and see if you can adapt one for your own organisation, to see if that's something that would work for you to discuss with the employees, with the staff, with the team. It's something that, we find useful in terms of if a member of staff is struggling with mental ill health, we can revert back to that wellness action plan and see if there's anything that we discussed in those meetings that we could do to help and support without having to necessarily, go to them directly at that point. So impact on minor behaviours. So small everyday actions equal big changes and big things. That was what I was saying about actions speak louder than words. And they do influence staff wellbeing and perceptions of being valued and trusted in an organisation. Sometimes pressure from leadership, late night messages, on WhatsApp groups and things like that. It does happen. And a colleague potentially being praised for working long hours can unintentionally pressure other staff to overwork. That culture of care versus guilt. So how absence is addressed either promotes care or promotes guilt, depending on how that's addressed. So again, to be mindful of, those meetings that happen. And I know a lot of time the back to work meetings are something that HR handle. But again, if there is underlying mental health issues that, you're aware of, then it's important to take those into consideration. And alignment builds trust. So consistent actions matching wellbeing statements build credibility and make staff feel psychologically safe. So that was where I was saying, saying something and actually following it up and showing the staff that you are taking on board what they've said. We talk about reasonable adjustments, don't we, for certain things, but there's always that thing, what is reasonable? And I think that's where it has to be taken into consideration. If a teacher was asking to work from home 2 days a week, that's not really a reasonable adjustment. They're in front of the children, but it may be that something could be altered to allow them some more time, or there might be somebody that could cover, or I think it's about that open dialogue and what is realistic. So I think what I'm going to do in a second is put you into some breakout rooms. I think times when you are struggling and you are finding things difficult, you do feel quite lonely, feel quite isolated, you feel like you're the only one. And I think, sometimes those open dialects with somebody that, I've noticed that you're not quite yourself at the moment, are you okay? It gives them time to sort of reflect and think, oh, somebody has noticed, and sometimes it can help open. Like you say, in big schools, it's really difficult. That's why it's quite nice to, sometimes work in teams and have your colleagues around you just in case, you do. But I think it's also about mirroring that open dialect between everybody. Something that I've tried to help create the ethos of in our team is that, that it is open and we do speak openly, and when we're not having such a good day, it's okay to share that information too. But time is precious, and it's one of those things, so it has to be a balance, I think, between the two. But yeah, that's really great. And from room 2,
signs, but when we were sort of thinking about when we might not know people.
Yeah, I think it is as well. It's things like you said, new colleagues, you might not necessarily know them, as well as colleagues that you've worked with for quite a considerable amount of time. But also, everybody's like, we call them stress containers. I don't know whether you've ever heard that terminology used before, but everyone's stress container is completely different. And that's sometimes built up by genetics, by, external influences, things like that, what people have got on their plate already and how much stuff is going in it. And I think some people can deal with lots of high volume stressors and can still, deal with those, but then other people can't. So again, it's about finding that balance and finding what works for somebody doesn't necessarily work for other people. When I deliver my introduction sessions, we look at some coping mechanisms, whether it be breathing techniques or different activities that people can do, because what works for one doesn't always work for somebody else. So thank you both rooms for having those chats and feeding back. So these are some of the signs, warning signs. So mood swings, I'm not going to read them all out, don't panic. I'm just going to go over a few. So mood swings, increased irritability or anger, behavioral changes, which was something that you both rooms picked up, difficulty concentrating, making decisions or remembering things, loss of interest in activities, changes in sleep patterns, changes in appetite or weight, drops in performance, withdrawing from colleagues or avoiding teamwork, problems with like logical thought processes and things like that, an inability to cope with the stresses of basic tasks. And those can all be things that sort of flare up. I think we've all suffered from days where we've not felt tip top or felt our best, and you have got tired and low energy and you're not really motivated and you are struggling. But most of those things do pass after a couple of days, whereas I think if it was a bit more of a prolonged thing that you notice with somebody, it is worth asking those questions. I also think, having done a lot of work with people on one-to-ones, sometimes how many of you, and obviously I'm not expecting to show your hands, but just something for you to take away and think about, how many of you in your life have someone has said to you, oh, how are you? And you've gone, yeah, I'm absolutely fine. Yeah, I'm okay. When actually really you're not. And that's because either one, you don't want to talk about it, two, people are busy and you think no one's got time. It's things like that that it's sometimes difficult. Working with one-to-ones, I think people almost expect that someone is going to ask if they're okay, so they already prepare their answer for that. We decided that maybe some of the things that we would do differently was we would ask random questions. We would ask something completely different. So, going into a one-to-one or a check-in with a member of the team and asking something like, what's your favorite thing you've done this week? Because one, it catches them off guard. Two, they don't have an answer prepared for that. And three, you do tend to, when you ask those type of questions, get to the nitty gritty of, if there's an issue or something. Not always, because some people are genuinely better at masking their behaviour than others. But it's something to think about, when you are having those meetings with colleagues, to take some of the predictability away from it and sort of see what responses you get. You'd probably be interested with some of the answers that you do get from your colleagues from that. So, understanding stress. So causes of stress can differ. So stress in school can arise from workload, time pressures, the demand, the change, the fast pace. I think schools are really fast paced, and you can be doing one thing 1 minute and then the next minute you're doing something completely different. So signs and symptoms, as we just talked about, can manifest irritability, exhaustion, concentration, headaches, disruption in sleep. Everybody always says it's better to put early intervention in. I think with that is about being able to recognize when early intervention is needed. So having those open conversations with colleagues, looking after people if you notice somebody's not quite right, asking those questions, and signposting to relevant organizations or agencies if you can do that. It does help prevent escalation if things are caught early. And there's some coping techniques and mechanisms put in place early on that can prevent it from escalating further. And promoting that supportive culture, so open understanding reduces stigma, and encourages seeking support, fostering empathy and healthier school environments. I think that's the one thing that I've noticed working in mental health and wellbeing, that the stigma is reducing. Like if I think about 6 years ago compared to now, mental health and wellbeing stigma has improved so much, but there's still a long way to go. There are still a lot of people that don't understand or don't feel comfortable. There was some information done in a survey that said something along the lines of the amount of people that would actually admit that they had been off work for absence due to mental health was like less than half of all people that had been off. They still didn't feel comfortable sort of saying that they'd had a day off due to stress or anxiety or anything like that, for fear of how it would be perceived from school, and what that would cause, what would that trigger anything from a HR process and things like that. So I think that still shows that in the sector there's still quite a long way to go with promoting mental health and wellbeing and looking after it and all of those things. So looking out for others, we said, didn't we, talking about some of the recognizing signs, so being withdrawn or just general changes in behavior. Varied stress response, so people show stress differently. Some people mask it really well, which requires some awareness and also knowing your colleagues, which, like we said, when if you have got high staff turnover in the places that you work in, sometimes that's really difficult, especially with the time factor to get to know your colleagues. Encouraging safe check-ins and raising concerns supports overall well-being. So sort of telling somebody that you've noticed a change in their behaviour makes them feel seen. It makes people feel valued and, like I say, listened to and understood. And leadership need to model empathy, and respond with understanding and actual practical support to help, with things that can be done. So protecting well-being, importance of taking breaks and, using annual leave or holidays, taking proper breaks away from your desk. I think sometimes people think with work-life balance that when you've got some deadlines and things, staring at the computer, sometimes you're not your most productive in those scenarios, in those situations. So sometimes taking a break away from the computer screen, going and doing something that you like in between makes you more productive when you come back. Reducing unnecessary workload, so trying to minimize repetitive admin tasks and excessive data collection and things like that. Open conversations, if you are struggling with workload and capacity, being able to have those conversations with your line manager, and identify if that can be changed. Can it be delegated elsewhere? Can the deadlines be moved? Are there things that can change about that situation, that scenario, that piece of work? And embedding well-being as a routine. So making sure that it comes into everyday practices, ensuring it becomes valued and is a natural part of the school day, is a natural part of your working day, whatever that may be or look like for you. What I wanted to do now was just ask any of you who are happy to feedback. Have you got any things that you do at your school or in your scenarios that you use to help with mental health and well-being? Have you got like a specific mental health and well-being first aider? Or I know some people run like clubs and things, to help with mental health and well-being. So just really wanted to give you the opportunity to talk to each other and see if there's anything that you do that you feel would benefit, other schools or other providers, really. You're all very quiet.
I'll say, I think for me, which we were talking about in our group, it's about that ethos and culture, isn't it? We're a smaller school, so um, the we do see each other a lot, but I think it's about the way you lead things. So they know it's open door, they know they can be open and honest with me. We check in with each other. And they check in with me as well, which is great because sometimes life can be stressful for their teacher at certain parts of, the time. I try and keep that on the low down. So because,
Yeah,
but equally at times we are human and so, things are going on. But I think it comes down to that culture, we do make sure it's regularly spoken about with tasks that we do. I've thought about the workload, I've thought about your well-being, I've thought about,
yeah,
this, is this too much? Do we think this? How would this impact that? So they're involved in those kind of decisions. And so then staff aren't then afraid to go, actually, when are you asking us to do this then, Cassie? Or, well, if we're doing
yeah,
this, what else are we getting rid of? Or how are we going to manage this? I make sure that as much as I can, I sort out their directed time within their appraisal so they understand that. I make sure that if we're asking to do something with subject coordinators, this, that, and the other, I give time for that. So I will get supply in and we'll have people out of class and give time. And we are a small school, so it's very difficult. I don't do lots of things like put yoga on or do shopping days or anything like that, but I've made sure I've put, say, every half term a subject leader day in so they each get an hour out of class to be able to do that. So if we're asking to do additional things on top of the teaching, which is almost kind of expected to be done in your own time, which I think is wrong, I will
yeah,
provide as much as I can for time,
yeah,
for them to do that, for those tasks to be done. And then, equally, if there then is a bit of time where they need to do that elsewhere, it's given, if you get what I mean, because of,
it's a
with that. But
balance,
it's,
isn't it? It's finding
yeah.
that balance. And I think some of the things that you said there were really, really powerful. You give them the why. I'm asking you to do this piece of work, but I have thought about your well-being. I have thought
Mm,
about the workload. I have thought how that's impacting you. And actually, as an employee, that's all you want to hear. I think that
mm,
open communication and that dialogue really, really helps employees to understand where they're coming from, what the shared work is. It's been thought about and it's been considered, and then it opens that conversation for them not to be fearful of coming and having that, I'm not really sure I think it is great that, you know, that works. It's very similar, you know, where we are, in that we like to have those open conversations. But I know some people are more confident than others in that area. So again, it's,
Yeah.
you know, finding that balance.
And I also, then just one last thing, I also, you know, kind of, if people are requesting time off, you know, I will look at that properly and, you know, make sure it's not just requesting for anything and any time and all the time, but, you know, I go back to the absence monitoring policy. I make sure I look at it, and it might be that actually, yes, you can, but it will be unpaid. I
Yeah,
mean, it always makes me laugh, you know, in the absence policy, you know, really for a funeral, it has to be kind of a family member. Okay. So if your friends have passed away, or you know, one of your friends' mums or something like that, who on earth requests to have to go to a funeral, and who on earth would deny that? I mean, no one's asking to go to a funeral for to have a time off, are they? But you know, so it might be, look, it doesn't come under the absence policy in kind of the relationship that it is, but of course that time is granted, but it might have to be unpaid. And so I then think as well, staff understand, and they will only ask, you know, when they need it, but they also know it pretty much. I've never said no. So, you
yeah,
know, how can we be saying about parental engagement and wanting them to come to shows and workshops, this, that, and the other, and then say no to your own staff who are parents to go to their children's?
yeah,
That just blows my mind. So you know, I will cover their class for you to then come in at 9:30 because you've gone and watched your child in their play.
yeah,
And I think that then also knows that I'm there for them, not just as a
yeah,
teacher or support staff or office staff. I'm there for them as a person and their life, and making sure that, you know, like I say, if they want to go off for 4 days, you know, to go and have a holiday or a festival, that
yeah,
wouldn't be accepted.
yeah.
But do you know what I mean?
It's
It's one
about
of
that
them.
it's about that reasonable adjustments again, isn't it? You know,
Mm,
like you say, to allow somebody to go and watch their own child in a
mm,
performance when you're asking parents to come and watch children in your own
mm,
school. It is one of those things, but you know, that means so much to so many who, you know, did Christmas nativities and things like
mm,
that. You know, you do. My child's in year 6, and I've looked at, she's got a better social calendar than I have, you know, and it's craft afternoon and leavers assemblies and leavers performances. And I'm like, oh, and they're all smack bang in the middle of the work day, which you can
mm,
guarantee, can't you? But again, it's little things like that. And knowing that, you know, when you go and have those conversations with your line managers, you know that the thought process has taken place, and that
mm.
if it is a no, there is a reason behind it.
Yes,
It's not just
absolutely. Yeah.
absolutely no, you're not going. Again, it's that communication between, you know, the employees and SLT and head teachers and all of that. And I think again, it's why communication is so powerful.
Mm.
um so it's really good. Thanks, you know, so much for sharing and for all of that. It's been really helpful. So anybody else? For everybody, everyone has mental health, good or ill mental health. So, and it fluctuates, as we all know, you know. In quite a, you know, for us, we work in an office environment. Although we're still to do with education, we work in an office environment, and we are predominantly female, in our part. You know, you have all the things, you know, from, you know, pregnancies, we have menopause, you know, and it's all of that. And all of those things are sort of external influence as well on mental health and well-being. And I know there has been a big push over the last few years with a lot of workplaces to do with menopause policies and things like that, and the understanding and things like that. Like I say, I do think there has been massive strides made to promote mental health and well-being. But I think asking people to do the mental health first aid, I did a course a couple of, well, about 4 years ago, and it was fantastic. It really gave me more of a passion and more of a drive to understand things and to try and help and support. And I think there is a massive gap with mental health and well-being still, where we're trying to sort of catch up. But there are lots of little things, because I understand, you know, like you said, Cassie, you work in quite a small organization, you work in quite a small school. You know, you're not going to be able to have somebody like myself who's a dedicated mental health and well-being lead and that's their only job, because in small organizations people do multiple roles. So it's about, the more people who've got an understanding or have got some training to do with mental health and well-being, and the more it's replicated from the top down. So, showing those behaviours and being honest and open, and showing that vulnerability sometimes to your colleagues and to staff. I think it's the culture, it's the ethos, it's how things are fed down from the top. And I think that it's really important. I know that it's something that has a huge impact. It's that personable touch, that personable approach, which in sometimes big organizations you don't get that. You could probably walk past the CEO and they wouldn't even know who you were. And it's those kind of things, to try their little things, to say good morning to somebody, hello, how are you doing? It's a small thing, but to somebody it can mean so much. So I think it's just thinking about little tweaks that can be made that aren't going to cost the earth, not going to cost you a lot of staff or a lot of time, but they would mean a lot and help embed those cultures from small things to then the bigger things. So I've just sort of summarised really some actions maybe to take or have a look at. So make staff wellbeing a visible senior leadership responsibility, and to commit to the education staff wellbeing charter. That healthy culture that we spoke about, create a psychologically safe environment where mental health is talked about openly and stigma is challenged. Manage workload as best you can. We all know that, their workload is high. Sometimes the deadlines are tight, but regularly review workload with staff and remove low impact or duplication of tasks or things that, administration tasks that are repetitive. Can processes be streamlined? Supportive line management, so train leaders to spot early signs of stress and hold regular supportive check-ins, have conversations with their team, be aware of their team as well. Provide role clarity, so reasonable deadlines and minimize last minute changes if possible. That clear expectations as well, I think, is a really big one. Staff knowing what their purpose is, what they're there to do, what their work is, what they're supposed to be actually doing, and having some clarity around that work really helps to make them feel part of the team. So training and capability, so offer mental health and wellbeing training for all staff if you can, if there is the capacity to do that. It could be like you get one person trained and then they train the rest of the team. It could be that you do a small 5-minute section at the start of your inset days, or the start of any CPD. You could have a sort of a 5-minute wellbeing, activity, quiz, task. There are things online, like there's a 5-minute seated yoga, which I make all of our trainees do, on one of my first sessions with them. So it's a seated yoga, and it is literally just for 5 minutes, and that's on YouTube. Starting some sessions with things like that, because all those little things show the staff and the people that you're working with that actually you are thinking about well-being, and trying to incorporate those things in daily practices really helps. So promote confidential support and counselling, including education support. I'll talk a little bit more about education support in a second. And local services. You can have little posters up in the staff rooms with, organisations that are available to help and support. I know some trusts and some schools do buy into schemes where there is counselling provided and things like that. Make sure your staff are aware of what those are and how to access them. Everyday wellbeing, so protect breaks where you can, encourage movement and provide calm spaces for staff. Listen and act, so gather staff voice regularly and clearly communicate what will change as a result. So one of the things that we did previously was we had an employee voice survey, which went round to all staff, and there was a section in it that said you said, we did. So trying to feed back to staff that, these are the things that came up in the survey that you've said, and this is what we've tried to do about it. Again, that open, clear communication, that we are listening to what you're saying. Some of the things that were suggested, like I said, being a teacher and wanting to work 2 days a week from home, that's not going to work. but there may be other things that we can do to try and help with other, areas of that. And review and improve. So monitor wellbeing alongside absence and retention data to inform ongoing improvement. I said earlier about absences, it's quite well documented in a lot of areas that people that do have days off to do with mental health aren't always honest about that. The reason for their absence will be something completely different. So again, knowing your staff, understanding that, and when you have any back to work meetings with team members and things like that, asking those questions. Sometimes they are difficult conversations and they are difficult to have, but I think everybody would feel better for having that conversation and understanding where everybody is at. So what attracts and retains staff? So clear expectations and fair workload. So where they understand their role, they understand what their workload is and workload distribution, clear, concise deadlines, and they understand the purpose for them doing something. Supportive leadership and induction. So making sure that you induct staff correctly and give them the information, also giving them reminders of where to go to look for things. When I started my job 13 years ago, I read all the policies as you do when you first start, but policies are changed and adapted over the years. How many people can actually say that they have reread them since any changes have been made, especially when you've been in an organisation for a long time? So that's something that's really important, especially, for instance, if you work with an organisation that's got like a wellbeing policy or anything like that. There are new things evolving all the time. So it is nice to have like a refresher, but maybe actually give the staff the information in a different way. Like some organisations, when they release a new policy, I think the DFE do it sometimes, they highlight the bits that they've changed so that you can sort of skim read it. You've not got to read the whole thing again, but you can see the highlighted changes. So, that is something that's quite an easy, quick win for somebody to highlight where the changes have been made. But actually that would mean a lot to colleagues because it would mean they're not spending lots of time rereading the whole policy. So sense of belonging and respect. So staff value environments where contributions are recognised and voices are heard, encouraging loyalty and hopefully, keeping that retention of staff there. And then effective recruitment and retention strategies. So strategies focusing on leadership, support and belonging outperform isolated incentives in retaining staff. So I know in organisations I've worked at before, they'll buy into something where you'll get a free coffee on your birthday. For me, that's not really a retainer. It doesn't, that for me, it's not massive. Whereas actually, going into the office and, colleagues saying happy birthday to you, and, a lot of the time in our organisation, other people decorate the desk or even going into the staff room at lunchtime and having like a little bit of cake and tea with everybody. It's little things like that. It's that communication, that feeling of belonging, that you're important, that you matter, that people care. Again, they're all little things that can be done that make people feel included, especially when you have got new starters and things like that. When they see that environment, it's nice. It sort of sends home a good message. So what I have done on the PowerPoint, like I say, you will all get access to this, is I've tried to highlight some things where you can go for support and information. So all of these are on Every Mind Matters, part of the NHS. So this talks about reframing unhelpful thoughts, tackling worries, facing fears, tackling to-do lists, problem solving, bouncing back from life challenges and staying on top of things. So there's sometimes resources, there's sometimes videos like blogs, audio files and stuff that you can have a look at, and have a read of, and also signpost anybody to. These I should have linked so when you click on the logo, it should take you to the website. So we've got Every Mind Matters is another one. Then we've got Calm, so that's a campaign against living miserably. We've got Samaritan's Mind. This is Headspace. So that's a YouTube channel, and they have lots of like guided meditations and things that they'll do. So they'll talk you through it on YouTube. And then a Mental Health Matters organisation. And then Education Support. So I don't know how many of you are aware of Education Support. It's an organisation that I only became aware of probably about 3 years ago. They are an organisation set up by people who've been in education, so they understand. They have like a counselling line that you can call and chat to somebody at the end of the phone. They've got information for individuals. They've got information for organisations. They have a document which I've put a link to at the bottom there, so setting boundaries. So some people, when they are new into organisations or new into the sector or haven't been somewhere for very long, they can have a real problem with setting boundaries and saying no to things. So that then in turn means that they take on a little bit too much, and that can backfire. So there's a good section on that, but they have lots and lots of information about education, to do with education. So please go and have a look at their website. It's really interesting. They've got lots of resources available, for you to have a look at, download, and things like that. So they're a really good organisation for you to familiarise yourself with, in case you do ever need them, or equally to point colleagues in the right way. You can always print a poster off and stick it in the staff room. It helps raise awareness and get the awareness for organisations like this out there. I've also tried to put some support cues in for children. That is essentially who we are working with, and we're trying to deal with their mental health and wellbeing as well as our own, as well as our colleagues. So there's lots of resources available on Twinkle. There's some are on for mood boosters on the BBC. There's Stormbreak, and there's Mind there. Obviously they've got Mind have got a lot of information for all different age ranges, so it's definitely worth a look. And then Young Minds, Compass, which have got organisations all across the different counties. The NHS and gov.uk have got some information about mental health and wellbeing services, and things like that, how you can do things within your organisation potentially to help with mental health and wellbeing. And that's it from me. I am sticking around for a little bit if anybody wants to ask me anything. On the PowerPoint at the front, my email address is on there. So if you have got any questions, or you're interested in knowing a little bit more, or you've got some burning question that you think of like tomorrow, because that's what happens to me when I always attend training. I finish it and then I think, I wish I'd have asked. So if that's the case, just drop me an email and I'll obviously get back to you as soon as I can. But I think George would love you to fill in the evaluation. So either by the QR code, or there's a link underneath it as well, which allows you to gain access to the evaluation. But like I say, I'm sticking around if anybody has got any questions. But thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come and listen. And like I say, if I can help any of you with anything, just drop me an email. But I think that's it, George. Anything else?
No, that's all. Thank you, Vicky. Like Vicky says, I'll send out the resources and the recording by the end of the week, and I'll follow up with the evaluation link tomorrow as well. So don't worry if you don't manage to do it right now. I can follow up an email as well tomorrow. But thank you very much, Vicky.
No problem. Thank you very much. Enjoy all of your evenings while the sun is still shining.